Hi everyone, welcome to the I'll Try That Beer News and Reviews podcast. This week we're talking Fuller's and their signature beer, London Pride. But first, Drabbers, you've got a hot topic for us.
Yeah, I do. So, as I do, doing lots of research toward this podcast because I'm pretty diligent when it comes to this sort of thing. I stumbled across quite an interesting article involving Her Majesty the Queen.
Ooh, old Queenie. Oh, Liz. Liz number 2.
You treat her with the respect.
So we go back to the Queen. And she's launched her own brand of beer that's coming out of Sandringham, her royal estate. So apparently it's grown from her organic barley that's grown on the royal estate. I personally don't think the Queen has grown this barley. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think she's got wellies on. She's out in the fields. I think she's got, her proper, farmer's peak caps on, and she's got one of those wooden spoke things, and she's lifting it up, throwing the bales over her shoulder.
It's a good message, though, isn't it? No matter what your disadvantage, you can get into brewing your own beer. Fair play.
Yeah, I think the Queen has a huge barrier to entry to get into that. She had to climb quite a few mountains to get there.
Yes, Mom.
Yes, no, I think it's very spot on in that beer has become, and starting a brewery has become very easy. I would say it's not easy, of course it isn't. It's still a business after all. You still got to be profitable. You still got to survive. But the fact remains that the Queen or the Sandringham estate brewing beer is doesn't surprise us that much, I suppose.
Do you reckon she's actually sampled the beer that's been created on Sandringham?
Her Royal Highness must have sampled it. She must have tasted it. I wouldn't have thought she would, sink a few pints of a Friday evening when, royal duties have become too hard. But she must have tasted it, I'm sure.
Well, there's one thing I think of when I think of the Queen as a micromanager. I think she's right in there. She's like signing invoices. She's like finding out who's on shift that weekend. I think she's right in there. Yeah, she's really, she's been crafting this design for really into all those meetings, trying to noodle it out. Yeah, I think she's right in there.
She's classy though. She won't mention it in the speech. That's those are two separate.
She doesn't mix work and pleasure.
Exactly.
She doesn't mix work and pleasure. She's very...
Yeah. Beers for the boys. Public addresses for the nation.
I think going on the lash with the Queen would be a right laugh.
It would be something. It would certainly be a good story, that's for sure.
Her Royal Highness definitely has some cracking stories.
How do you think a night out with the Queen would start?
You mean a night N-I-G-H-T or K? N-I-G-H-T. A night out with the Queen and he's in full armour. He was there just wearing his gauntlets by the end of it.
Do you reckon you turn up to Buckingham Palace, with a 6-pack? You turn up maybe about 7 o'clock.
For prees.
Planning to go out by about 10 o'clock. Free beers at Buckingham Palace.
Get over to Embargo before the free entry stops. She doesn't have to bring her own ID, though. She just flashes a 20. She's like... I'm not messing about, mate. I might not be VIP, but I'm pretty VIP. Yeah, we'll have that booth in the corner. Tar very much.
Oh, you go booth? Okay, you got a booth. I mean, to be fair, you'd expect maybe with the Queen, you might get into a booth or a table of some sorts, but, you're still up at the bar. You still have to, wade through people to get there. She's probably elbowing people, like the rest of us, to get into get a drink.
So I'm more excited to see her on the dance floor. I reckon she's probably had ballroom dancing lessons, but I reckon you could turn that into a bit of alternative dance and throw some big old shapes.
And I reckon as soon as the DJ puts on anything by Queen or Bohemian Rhapsody, she just rolls her eyes and goes, oh, I knew they'd do this. Obvious. We haven't talked about the end of the night with the Queen. What happens there?
Oh, kebab.
A kebab. She's in a kebab, does she? Now, does the Queen also, does she pull out she takes off her high heels and she puts out the pumps that she's had in a handbag the whole time?
No, Queen's just gone barefoot around the streets of London.
Don't worry, gang, I'll call us a carriage.
Yeah.
I mean, all in all, I'd say this sounds like a great night out. If, we could do that with the Queen. So, yeah, I mean, we're obviously yet to try these beers from Sandringham Estate. We tried to get them for an episode and they're not selling anything right now. We might find them in supermarkets. It tantalizingly tells us on the website. We might get them on websites in the future.
Look forward to that. Can't wait.
Guys, so I'm full of pride at the moment. London pride.
That's possibly the worst joke you've done ever on this podcast.
It was a smooth transition, though.
It was an awful transition.
If you're going to carry on like this, I'm going to do more details about the different temperatures at which you can drink certain beers. Fuller's are a brewery in London, a part of London that you used to live not too far away from, I understand, Joe.
Yeah, actually, well, that's true. I jumped all around the southwest London and West London is my jam. Lived around Fulham, lived around Chelsea, lived into Putney, moved into Battersea as well. So Fuller's, or the Griffin Brewery, an iconic brewery in London. If you're coming into London from the northwest or from the west side, which is most of the UK, if you're basically driving from one part of the UK into London and you're not coming from, Kent or Sussex or whatever, then you're going to go past the Fuller's Brewery. The Fuller's Brewery is still on this site at Griffin. It's called Griffin Brewery, and Griffin Brewery is basically like the one kind of the main site. It's there in Chiswick, and you can see it driving in. There's this big, huge, ornate looking, kind of that Fuller's Brewery symbol. It's glorious, isn't it? I want to say kind of burgundy red, but I know that's not right because I'm a bit colorblind. So what red would you say that is?
Yeah, so I wanted to say regal red, but that's not a particular kind of red. But yeah, there's a red that I can only say it just goes very well with gold. Crimson, maybe?
I'm just going to call it red.
Gorgeous brewery, and actually that's made me think, because you mentioned a couple of areas of London there that I know that Drabbers is going to laugh at me here, but I remember back in my university days, I rode the Head of the River race. So the Head of the River race is the course that the Oxford-Cambridge... Thanks, Drabbers. I know it's funny, isn't it? You're laughing at me. So the Head of the River race is the course that Oxford and Cambridge row. And so even as a guy who loves rowing, I can't say it's pretty boring. But the Head of the River race is a really long 5-kilometre stretch of the Thames, where you go past basically that area of Fulham, where Fulham's football club's ground is, Craven Cottage. You go under Hammersmith Bridge. It's a really arduous, very long part of the river to run through, and that's why the Oxford-Cambridge race is so popular. Is you have to really put in a stint to win. And I remember one of the best feelings I ever had drinking beer was having done the Oxford, the Head of the River race, which is 5.7 kilometres, I think, rather than a traditional 2-kilometre rowing race. We finished that, tough day, and I think it must have been February or March time. We went into a pub on the banks of the Thames, not far from Hammersmith, and we're drinking Fuller's London Pride. Less than a mile or so, or a couple of miles from the Fuller's Griffin Brewery, and watching the rugby, having had a successful day on the river. For me, you can't beat that. And there's also something to be said. I think you can taste it in the beer, but Fuller's and the Griffin Brewery, there's a lot of history there, and that is a staple beer for London dwellers and the UK as a whole.
I was just really involved in Barbara's story. I was there for it.
I used to live not that far away from where Oxford and Cambridge used to start, the rowing race used to start, when I lived in Putney. So, right along there. And it's just all along the banks of the Thames, right by the Chiswick, up to Chiswick. And that's obviously where Fuller's Brewery is. But for me, London Pride is quintessentially, a London ale. It's actually now they've renamed it to an original ale, which I've never heard that phrase being used for to describe a beer, of original ale. So I think London Pride or Fuller's have made this decision that, because they've been around for so long, 172 years to be precise, that, that they have the right to take themselves away or distance themselves from other ales and beers that have been out there and just say, this is London Pride, It's an original ale. This is a beer that has been around for a very, very long time. And I think that's quite interesting. This is an ownable space for those more established brewers that have been out for, that have been around for this amount of time, that are now saying, we're not an IPA, we're not a pale ale, we're an original. We're something that has been around and cannot be easily replicated in the modern times.
I think that's really nice because they've kind of set themselves up. They're kind of saying that they are the original. They are the staple, and everything else from this is not so much. It's the wrong word to say imitation, but a variation. I think would be the word to say is a variation of what they're based on. They're saying we're the original. We're the first. Everything else. They're not saying it's bad or anything like that, but they're saying you guys have changed it, tweaked it, but we are the original formula that's been put out there.
Now, talking that they've been around for a very long time, they are, as you say, Drab, the original formula. What do you guys make to the news that, they sold, over about 2 years ago now, they sold London Pride and the Fuller's Brewery, they sold their whole business to Asahi for £250 million.
You know what? I would like to say it surprises me, but it doesn't. Since doing this podcast, we have learnt about so many breweries that have started off small, independent, or have been going for years and years and years, but then have sold themselves to a bigger brewery, which I 100% get. At the same time, if I was offered that big kind of payout sort of thing, I would probably take it. Sort of thing. There's only so much you could go as a small brewery before you kind of have to be brought out to develop your product anymore, which is kind of sad to say.
But you say small brewery. Fuller's is not a small brewery. Fuller's is a staple here in the UK. They've been brewing beer on the Griffin site in Chiswick since the 1600s. This is a well-established, long-established company. And, they are one of the biggest hotel and pub chain owners in the UK.
Yeah, I'm often curious, hearing about brews, particularly one such that's so long established as you described there, Joe. Whether it's about having an owner perhaps from somewhere further away, whether that owner might give them the opportunity to have access to other beer drinkers in other parts of the world, or whether it's necessarily that they're getting an owner that can maybe give them a bit of an influx of cash to make their beer more well known within the UK. As you said, Fuller's very well established in the UK, but equally potentially a little bit centralised and perhaps without the reach to the other parts of the country. So that's what I'm curious about, is whether it's about expanding the reach where they are, or it sounds strange to say it's a different idea, but access to completely different international markets is what I'm curious about.
I think that's spot on. I think that's exactly what this acquisition is going to open up. We've talked about these major acquisitions before. Will we start to see some of these more traditional, local or national favourites being in more international markets? But I think vice versa as well. We know Asahi wants and needs to make a big impact here in the UK. So a company like Fuller's makes perfect sense, because they don't just sell beer and make beer. They own the areas where people can go, well, the pubs, the hotels, where people will access their drinks. So another drink manufacturer like Asahi knows that they can already get listings immediately in the UK. They probably already have, obviously, they're already well established here in the UK, Asahi, but it's just increasing that presence, where you're going to get the Asahi products based in it. And I think this is quite interesting from a company like London Pride, because it is very distinctive. It's an old school, it's got London in the name, and we know that London exports incredibly well around the rest of the world. London gin, exactly, the gin world has really leaned heavily on its like London foundings, to export well. So, I think you could start to see London Pride being used and sold in a lot of different countries. But let's talk about taste for a little while. Travis, maybe you can describe the taste of London Pride, and then maybe a second question to Barbara of, do you think that taste would export well?
So it's bitter. It's definitely a bitter taste that comes through, but it's very smooth at the same time. Can you kind of see where I'm coming from? It's a bitter smooth, but it's a pleasant bitterness. We've tried some beers before that it's quite a harsh and not very nice bitterness, but it's quite a mellow bitterness. Is that correct to say?
It sounds almost like it's a bittersweet symphony, right?
Yeah, so it's funny when I talk about it, and actually I checked because I noticed you said that it was an original ale. There was another level to this which I wanted to ask you guys about, because I've got what is presumably a recently released bottle where they've slightly changed the design, where they call it an amber ale, and they also around the neck of the bottle, that label up there has got the signature of the British and Irish Lions, which again is kind of saying, look, remember, we're British. This is a UK based thing. But equally, the other point I wanted to mention is you talk about ales. I always hear people talk about, particularly with the pales, talking about something being hoppy. I think this is, I delicately use the phrase, but I think this is a malty beer. It's almost like a best bitter, as Drab has just described, a malty, and I feel that's quite a bold. I think my old man would use the phrase "puts hairs on your chest" sort of beer. Does that sound about right with you, Joe?
Yeah, well, I think it's. I mean, looking at the color of it, it's a very tawny coloured. It's very brown. They call it a premium ale.
Yeah.
If I kind of read out how they describe the beer, I think this might kind of sum it up, because I'm feeling this. It's what you were saying for that bittersweet Drabbers. It borrows sweet raisin, biscuit, and dried fruit notes from the crystal malt, while fresh piney herbs emanate from the hops. So it does have that kind of like sweetness and, kind of like malty, kind of coming in there. Like it is, I do get a little bit of, I wouldn't so much to say raisin, but if you want to put a word on it, yeah, okay, I get something. This isn't sweet like we're talking like sugar. This is sweet in like a natural fruit.
It really does sound like they're describing a fruitcake, though.
But I think London Pride is a bit fruitcakey.
So we're saying it's kind of the worst cake.
Fruitcake's all right.
Fruitcake is the worst kind of cake.
No, take that back. Fruitcakes are good. I like a good fruitcake.
Okay, then, but there's way better cakes in the world, and if you were to pick over, would you go, I really want some fruitcake right now?
Do you agree that London Pride is the fruitcake of the beer world?
Yes. So I don't really want it all the time, but it's okay if somebody has it in their cupboard.
Travis, if someone offers you a bit of fruitcake, you're probably going to say, yeah, I'll have that fruitcake.
If somebody goes, no, I'm diabetic, but if somebody went, Rich, do you want some fruitcake? Or do you want this really nice chocolate cake? I'm going to go, I want the really nice chocolate cake. Because fruitcake is just, nah.
This chocolate cake in your analogy might be a Brewdog Punk IPA.
Yeah.
And I think you've just, in cake terms, shown what's happening right now in the UK beer industry. We have, the old-fashioned, but like very staple, and a lot of people still love a good fruitcake in the London Prides. But you have the chocolate cakes of the world, the Brewdog Punk IPAs coming in there, but people are going to go, oh, actually, I'd rather have that instead. And this is what's happening with the sales. Like London Pride sales are going through the floor in a respectable way. I say respectable way. You don't want any numbers to go through the floor, but this isn't dropping off as in, like we talked about John Smiths not that long ago, and John Smiths haven't been on the scene for a very, very long time. And, their drinker base is unfortunately like moving or like passing on. Whereas London Pride still resonates with a lot of people. But its sales are still declining on a quite a flat curve.
Loath as I am to disagree with my esteemed colleague, Drabbers, but I'd have thought that Fuller's London Pride is more like the Victoria Sponge. It's, classic, time-honoured, known by a lot of people. Okay, yes, these days the Great British Bake Off may have taken things into another world, but I think this is where a lot of the beers originally came from. This is one that we know. Mary Berry would respect the brewing process that's gone in to make Fuller's London Pride. She knows full well that nowadays people want a shoe bun and that sort of thing that's been influenced by brewing techniques from around the world. But this is kind of a little bit where it came from, and it has its role. It might not be so popular these days, but it has its role.
I think you've got something there, Barbs, and especially when you're talking about Great British Bake Off, because you guys may have seen that Fuller's have come out with their own version of a craft beer company or brand that's called Frontier.
Okay.
I'm familiar with Frontier, yeah.
So I feel like if London Pride is the Victoria Sponge of, the beer world,
Fruitcake.
or fruitcake, that Frontier is Fuller's attempt at being a Great British Bake Off, like jazzing up these traditional cakes.
Yeah, I feel we're in stark contrast with each other. If some of us are calling Fuller's London Pride Victoria Sponge and some of us are calling it fruitcake.
And by some of us, it's you and Drabbers are calling it one or the other.
Yes, sorry, that's true.
I've yet to weigh in on this, if I'm on this fruit cake or Victoria Sponge debate.
Mediate the contrast.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, love it. This is amazing.
Go on then, Joe. What cake is London Pride?
Well, if you are asking me to mediate, I say that both of you have made very valid points towards the fruitcake to the Victoria Sponge.
You're not our divorce lawyer, Joe.
Yeah.
You've asked me to mediate. This is how you mediate.
Drabbers, it's fine. You take the hard ales. I'll take craft.
I haven't finished my mediation. You both have very equal points, but I think you're both wrong. And I think that London Pride, it actually fills me with a lot of joy to talk about London Pride, because it is one of those beers that's been around for a long time and you have a lot of stable to it. So I'm trying to think of a great cake that fills me with pride and joy, because I enjoy a London Pride. Like London Pride, you know what you're going to get. It's going to be this traditional ale. It's going to have very full of flavour. It's nothing but flavour the whole way through.
It's going to be distinctly average.
I don't think that though. I think maybe I'm more leaning towards the Victoria Sponge with Barber now, because you've said that.
It's a distinctly average beer.
How dare you, Mr. Drabwell?
I taste a lot of flavour. I taste something that is really quintessentially
So much
English.
character, isn't there?
And it's got a lot of character. You can almost taste the history, which is weird to say, but you can taste the fact that this thing has been around and been brewed in this exact same way for a very, very long period of time.
So it's basic. It's not been improved upon. It's not been changed in any way, sort of thing. It's a basic beer. If we're going back to the point that it says it's the original, that it says it's the first one of its kind and all this sort of stuff, it's basic. It hasn't been improved upon. It hasn't been expanded upon or anything like that. It's the original. It's the basic version.
You can't improve perfection.
Basic and been around for a long time, I don't think are the same thing. I think there's a point that you're making there, which is very true, which is that, there are a lot of companies out there who have innovated. They've changed flavors. They've tried to do something different, and some are succeeding. A lot aren't succeeding in that category. But if you have a recipe for quite literal success, which London Pride have, they've been a staple in the UK for a very, very, very long time. They obviously export very well, which is why Asahi have taken a real interest in them. I am a guy of my 30s, and I enjoy London Pride. I've never, the people who are in their 60s who enjoy London Pride weren't there when London Pride first started. London Pride were here before we have started, and they're going to be here a lot longer than when we finish. So I just think London Pride's going to be constant. So for us to put our stake in the ground and say, oh, it's basic, whatever, it's just not your preference.
You're getting me wrong here. So basic can be, it's not a complicated brew and it's not a complicated flavour, which basic can be fantastic because you can have very basic meals and everything like that. Taste absolutely fantastic. I'm not saying it's a bad beer, but it is a basic beer. It's no frills. There's nothing special coming from it. It is tasty. It is nice, but it is simple in its flavours.
I know full well I'm putting myself at risk of getting laughed at big time by Drabbers here. But I fancy myself as a bit of a chef, right? And I was doing some...
I've seen you in the kitchen. I've worked with you in the kitchen, Barber. I know what your chefing level is.
I haven't even said... if you're going to bring up the raspberry souffle, I'm going to kill you.
Oh, quick, guys, take it out of the oven. The raspberry souffle will flop. Take it out. They didn't even eat it. They didn't eat the raspberry souffle, did they, Barber? They had one spoonful of it.
We'll edit this out, Joe. We'll edit this out. We'll get rid of this. We'll get rid of this. He's gone mad. We can't, can't keep that in there. However, It makes me laugh because in this house, I put together a fair amount of food put together by or recipes defined by Jamie Oliver, and there's a wonderfully unwieldy phrase that he uses, which is "Don't confuse simple with not delicious." And I think you need to bear that in mind.
I'm not saying it's not nice. You've got me wrong. It's just a very basic. It's just a generic taste.
What's a non-basic drink?
Yes, that's a good
Because
question.
we're basically saying that we know of other drinks that taste similar, which I think you're saying. But then also at the same time, unless you're going to talk about a bubblegum beer, which I know you've tried recently and absolutely despised about, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a good beer.
I once left a glass of squash out for too long and I drank it and that was all right.
So we're looking at these beers. We're looking at these companies that are creating these fantastic collaborations. We've drunk so many beers that have been collaborations with other breweries that have created these fantastic things. So you look at the one I raved about, the Double Nipah, that came from Salt Brewery. That is a complex, and that's a non-basic beer. That is exploring flavour, and it's taking away from the original, which London Pride is it states itself to be the original. It's saying that it is what every ale is built off, sort of thing. It's saying it's what it's built off, so that it's the basic level of what they're saying an ale should be. And there's all these other ones that have expanded and they've blown up on these flavours that they're infusing all these ridiculous flavours to, that are creating these phenomenal beers that we've tried them on the podcast and we've raved about them, sort of thing. And you can't argue. It's saying it's the original. That's what it is. It's the basic. It's the bottom level of what an ale should be. That's what they've claimed.
Yeah, no, I think there's an element to what you're saying. I get what you're saying. And I think you've taken real offence to the fact that they've called themselves the original. And I think...
It's a bold statement.
But it's true, though. A company that's been around that long has it. I'm not saying that they're not... let's face it. If Fuller's Brewery were to start doing a load of collaborations with a load of other companies and brewers and stuff like the new brewers know they have to do, I think that would be a great idea.
I'm there for it.
I think the fact that Fuller's Brewery are just resting on their laurels, let's put it that way, and they're just kind of reskinning themselves and saying, no, we're really digging into the fact that we're the original, we don't need to change. I think that's where you're getting at as well. I understand that now, that's more like they're not willing to innovate. I don't think London Pride is something they should touch. I think London Pride should always be London Pride, but that doesn't make me, but I do completely agree with you that these bigger, more established companies need to start really looking around and not just reskinning themselves as Frontier. I haven't really tried any Frontier craft beers. I would love to try, we're going to do that at some point, I'm sure, but maybe that's just a reskin and maybe they're just quite mediocre craft beers, or they're very good craft beers because it's coming from an established great brewery that is Fuller's, who know how to make great beer. But I'm completely with you. These more established companies need to be doing some of the stuff that the newer breweries have started doing, which is like collaborations and all these kind of things. And it's 100% driven the collaborations because get yourself out there, to be a bit more PR, try and get yourself to be well known, to spread the love of beer around the world. And I think these bigger breweries that have been around for a long time haven't really done any of that.
Yeah, I would also point out, Rich, also bear in mind Fuller's, we focused on London Pride tonight, but bear in mind they do other beers. ESB is one that I've heard lots of people absolutely rave about. There's people out there who believe ESB is the finest beer that is available. I understand they do one called Honeydew, which is an organic golden, and there's also a beer called 1845, which I'm not so familiar with myself. So worth bearing in mind, ultimately, Fuller's do others, and it has been made quite clear here that Joe and I have a soft spot for London Pride. But, they do Frontier, they do a selection of others. They might not be doing so much in terms of letting us know what the crazy and wacky bubblegum beers that they do are available, but they are worth looking at the rest of their portfolio. I would consider all of the others just on the basis of how strong a beer I think London Pride is as well, though.
Right, let me talk to you guys about their numbers. So on Twitter, you can find them as @London_Pride or Fuller's London Pride. And they have 16.5k followers on Twitter. And you can find them on Instagram as Fuller's. and they have 18.1k followers. So I think, to kind of sum up, London Pride or Fuller's as a whole, if you like cake, you're probably going to have a good debate about it.
For me, it's much like a carrot cake.
And that's all we have time for this week's episode of the I'll Try That podcast. And so from me, Joe,
Rich,
and Simo.
Goodbye. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram,
Twitter,
and watch us on YouTube.
Goodbye now. Always drink responsibly, and if you or anyone else needs some help, go to drinkaware.co.uk for more information.